Thank you very much, panelists. Sorry for those who are raising hands, but please keep your question for the next round as well, because we can also respond during that session. Now I hand over to Marilyn to moderate the next panel. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Obosebe. Okay, great. So my name is Madeline Bass. I'm a researcher and PhD candidate with the MOVES European Joint Doctorate, and I'm really honored and grateful to be here to moderate this next panel, which is titled Oromo Perspectives on the Crises in the Region. So in addition to the two panelists' skills in their fields, I really want to recognize them for their untiring commitment to articulating and sharing the Oromo struggle. So they've each dedicated years of their lives helping the public make sense of the crises that have come to color Oromo culture and politics. As discussed at length in the previous panel and later, even though Oromo youth sacrificed everything to organize a movement that would overthrow the violence of the state, this labor has yet to result in a tangible change. And further, we have seen that political violence is not an isolated issue. While rates of famine rise, climate catastrophe looms on the horizon, and another generation of children grows up in an era of fear, the violence is all around. As the Oromo work to find justice for those lives lost and misled in the ongoing struggle for freedom and self-determination, there must be space made to describe, redescribe, clarify, and carefully explain the nuances of the Oromo perspective. And this panel seeks to shed light on some of those complexities and the particular ways that the Oromo people navigate and understand them. So I'm here to moderate, but I'm really most excited to be able to learn from the brilliance of these panelists. So I'll share some short biographies. Our first panelist is Tsedale Lemma, who started journalism back in the year 2000 and worked in different newspapers until 2005. In the wake of post-election uncertainties, she left journalism, but returned in February of 2011 when she established the Addis Standard monthly magazine. She has since been named a rising star on the African continent, a member of the Bandung International Advisory Board, and a contributor to media sources such as the New York Times. In December of 2020 and February of this year, Tsedale testified before the US House Foreign Affairs Committee, and her recommendations on how the US should solve the war in the Tsegay region remains a key pillar of the US policy. After serving Addis Standard as its editor-in-chief for 11 years, Tsedale has most recently left her position to become the CEO of Jackin Publishing, the publishing company for the Addis Standard. She holds a diploma in teaching foreign language from Jima University, a BA degree in print journalism from Addis Ababa University, and a diploma in online journalism from Stockholm University of Journalism. And our second panelist is Obo Milkiyas Bulcha. So Milkiyas is currently a PhD candidate at Bulay Hora University in Ethiopia. He's a lawyer by training and has served as a lecturer of law at Ambo University for over 7 years. And he's also been a key member of the defense team of Oromo political prisoners. So I will start with letting our panelists share some of their thoughts. I have a few questions, and then we should have a lot of time for rich Q&A. We'll start with Tsedale, who has 5 key points which she will be addressing today. First, the Oromo must take part in reversing the revolution. Second, post-Oromo protest and Kero revaluation, the political dynamics must seriously be examined. Third, the greater question, what can be done now, given the situation in Oromia? 4, the lack of apathy or accountability toward the political organizations, especially by civil society, is an urgent matter that needs to be undertaken. And 5th, Oromia is at war with itself. How? And ways to resolve the growing crisis. So with that, I will pass the mic over to Tsedale. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madeline. Good afternoon. I see quite a full room attending this event. This is my second appearance at OSA event, and I'm very much honored to be amongst you. I was listening to the presentation by Milkiyas earlier, and it gave me an idea of why I wanted to say the things that Madeleine has outlined earlier. I am here to say a few words. She mentioned some of the topics that I would like to talk about, but I wanted to begin by imploring the question that Iskel talked about, Milkiyas talked about, and we are in general talking about a counter-revolution, a revolution that the Oromo protest had morphed into, and the Oromo people have brought in and propelled an Oromo government, a state that is now under the firm control of an Oromo. And we are talking about a counter-revolution presided over by none other than the Oromo themselves. And I would like to ask, dare to say that we are discussing the counter-revolution that's presided over none other than the Oromo. Oromia regional state today is much more under the firm grip of Oromo leadership than it was during the 27 years of the TPLF, EPRDF regime, when Oromia regional state came into a statehood under the new constitution. And we fought so hard against that. The Oromo fought so hard against having a representative government that is being assigned by the TPLF, EPRDF to govern them. That was part of the Oromo revolution, to have ownership of the statehood of the Oromia regional government and to have the right to self-determination, the successful implementation of the constitution, that the Oromo could be in charge of governing themselves and not by an appointed leadership that used to be under the 27 years of the EPRDF, TPLF regime. We had that revolution, and the Oromo became firmly in control of the Oromia regional state. And it happens to be the same time when a war between the Oromos broke out in Oromia regional state. So now we have this dilemma of an Oromo being in the state control, but at the same time at war with each other. So I think the very basic question we need to begin when we listen to the presentations from Professor Iskel and Milkiyas is that who did that? Who reversed the Oromo revolution? Yes, it's very easy to say that, the transactional alliance between the Oromara transactional alliance, that the leaders of the Amhara regional state and the Oromia regional state struck, had a role in propelling the Oromo leadership to the front, to control the state power. But does that mean that we're not taking ownership of the failure, the counter-revolution that we are witnessing today? Does that mean that we are not going to assume the responsibility that under an Oromo leadership, for example, controlling the media? I'm not even talking about the federal government. I'm talking about the Oromia regional state. We have a media there which is propagating the narrative, the anti-Oromo narrative, under the leadership of Oromo journalists. If you look at the OBN, and if you look at sometimes the guesses that are happening there, undermining the Oromo question there. And this is being, under the auspices of nobody but the Oromos themselves. So we need to assume the ownership of the failure of the revolution, of the counter-revolution that we witnessed. When Milkiyas was talking about ODP sitting in its central committee and planning how to reverse the Oromo revolution, who did this? We need to have the courage to confront that, it is the Oromo leadership that has reversed this. And so when we say this, we have to talk beyond taking the responsibility. we have to think about how did we let that happen? How did the Oromo relegated the ownership of producing the knowledge, streamlining the question, the Oromo question, and the relationship with the state, when the state is supposedly under an Oromo leadership? Why did the Oromo civic organizations relegated their responsibility of holding the Oromo leadership the same way that they did hold the EPRDF leadership? What happened to that? We need to look inward first and restart again from where it was left 4 years ago. And for this to happen, there has to be some level of agency that and so for this, I think, this was unfortunate. We will need to really look inward and think about whether or not an Oromo that is not at peace with itself can be at peace with an oppressive state. So here is where I think is the role of the academics, the role of Oromo civic organizations should come forward in holding the power to account and asking the question as to why is Oromia Special Forces today are engaged in war with the Oromo Liberation Army. Who should be mediating this? Who should be asking this question? And why is it that Oromia today has less sovereignty than it had for the 27 years under the EPRDF TPLF regime, right? Why is it, why is it the Oromo leadership, Oromia leadership today is allowing armed groups from neighboring states in Amhara to come and operate in Oromia regional state? Who should be holding this government to account if it is not the academics, the civil society, the Oromo, Oromo-centered civic organizations to hold that government and asking why was this revolution reversed? When is that we will stop the blame on others and start looking inward and to push for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Oromia between the Oromo Liberation Army and the Oromo Special Forces, federal forces included. But Oromia Special Forces are part and parcel of this war. We need to recognize that. And we need to be able to create a system in which, call it a pressure group, to hold warring parties to account that this is not the question that the Oromos were demanding. What happened to the 50 years of struggle, streamlining the Oromo interest, defining, identifying the Oromo relationship with the state, with the Ethiopian state? It is not only the Oromo revolution that was reversed, it is also the 50 years of the struggle. The struggle is thrown back now with the resuscitation of the same narrative that the Oromo have spent 50 years fighting against under the leadership of the Oromo army, intelligence, federal forces, and also in Oromia. Do not undermine that. And so we will need to really look inward first to the failure and assume the responsibility as much as we would like to look outside for parties to blame. Assume the responsibility and recognize that this is happening. The sovereignty of Oromia regional state today is much more violated than it was for the 27 years under the TPLF EPRDF regime. And so we need to be able to hold them to account and get back to the alternative knowledge production pressure group to hold them to account the same way that we held them to account. The Oromo Revolution was a non-violent movement, right? But it was not only a movement on the streets, it was also a movement in terms of knowledge production, a movement in terms of streamlining the demands, the questions. People who have been a part and parcel of that have returned it back and sold out the revolution for rent distribution. Are we going to recognize this or not? people who were on this side, who helped quite a lot in identifying, in clarifying the Oromo struggle, have abandoned it and sold that for what? Condominium and cars, right? So we need to return back into first identifying how we felt that. All the counter-revolution, all the activities that Milkiyas was talking about, how did that come about? We cannot cleanse ourselves out of it. And so with this recognition, if this recognition is there, I would really like to see an Oromo civic organization as a pressure group coming together and identifying where we failed, articulating that correctly, leaving differences aside, and finding out again how to return back the struggle and how to respond and who failed it. First, identify who failed the Oromo question, and serve as a pressure group. Establish, a consensus statement into holding the powers that are there to account for the failure for the counter-revolution that we are condemned to live today. And so I think as a conference of intellectuals, here is the challenge I will be, before I finish my blabbering, here's the challenge I will be throwing at. We will need a very strong civic organization that could really bring the voices together and hold the powers to account. Ethiopia is headed at, they are all talking about this national dialogue. Yes, it's a dead on arrival, but the push has to be there. We will need to assume that there is going to be a redefining of the state-society relations as we go by, because that is where the politics is headed at. It is bloody. But we need to look beyond. And we also need to really create how a peaceful path out of the current war that Oromia is subjected to. We know the parties involved in this war, but we really don't know how we can get out of that. And who should be doing that unless independent organizations should come together, put the differences aside, and outline and create that pressure group for a peaceful resolution of the war in Oromia. It's not a narrative, it's an actual war that's happening. This is not something that one party is saying it and the other just condemning the other. An actual war is happening today. And Oromia at war with itself cannot be at peace with the Ethiopian state, because the Ethiopian state predominantly is positioned against the interest, as it were. And so here is where, so solving this, looking inward first, and creating the avenue for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Oromia today, it's an exercise of coming together and assuming the agency that the Oromo had assumed during the 4 years protest. When the Gerog area were on the street, the Oromo were also supporting in terms of the knowledge production, in terms of articulating the fight, telling the world what they wanted, how it could be. We need to return back to that. But for that to happen, there has to be a semblance of unity to happen among the multiple Oromo civic organizations. Create one strong institution to serve as a pressure group, be that creating a media or whatever responsibility it has. But there has to be a unity that to come together to reboot again and to start streamlining the Oromo question. So I would end it here and would answer if there are any questions.
Galatoma Guda, that was really, I know you called it rambling, but you just speak so eloquently and I could listen to you all day. Thank you for that. Before we go to open questions, we'll give Milkiyas, a chance he has also some slides prepared, and then we'll move to the broader Q&A. So Milkiyas.
Madeline, could you give Kia a quick minute to explain about the security with Zoom issue? I think that's key before we proceed.
Sure, yeah.
He may not, so we
Oh,
can-
Kia, we have to probably unmute him for him. I don't see Kia in the chat.
Yeah, we just wanted to apologize. The Zoom has a very low security, and what had happened there, we've been under security spam coming in, so we apologize to the public and the presenters. We're doing our best to filter these attacks. Thank you so much. We can proceed.
Dr. Ray, may I add one more now that I'm also one of the guards for this. The co-hosts, please do not allow any waiting person without cross-checking. Let the person wait a few minutes, that's okay. We will cross-check and then allow the person in.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. Thank you. So Obo Milkiyas, whenever you're ready, you can begin your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the generous introduction. Are you hearing me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you all. My title is the Ethiopian National Dialogue Act, its constitutionality, the process, and the content analysis of the law. When you hear the term national dialogue, the rhetoric of the current national dialogue in Ethiopia, you may think of that the law in Ethiopia is not implemented, so you may think from illegitimacy from not realized. But what I'm going to tell you is that the law itself is unlawful. It has no constitutional base. The parliament which made the law has no power to make so. The National Dialogue Act itself is exclusionary. How it brings the convener or the commission to facilitate the dialogue itself is not credible. So my presentation therefore focus on the
Perhaps it's just my connection, but I think we've lost your audio.
Yeah, he's presenting from Oromia. Probably he's having a connection issue.
Can you hear us? Maybe if you can present with your video off, sometimes that helps the connection.
Let me see, I'm trying to see.
Okay, yeah, looks like he's. Sorry, folks. Doesn't seem like he's back yet. Let's see, we'll wait just a minute or two to see if he can come back. And if not, we can perhaps start with the Q&A. I know we're kind of on a tight, okay, good. Looks like he's back.
So my presentation divided into 6 parts. I will, after I highlight on the background of the crisis, then I will just simply explore on the conceptualization of the national dialogue. And then I will just draw some of the experiences from the whole. international practice, whether it is a lesson for Ethiopia or not, then I will directly go to the Ethiopia National Dialogue Act. And next to that, I will present the critical assessment, what is in the present my concluding remark and as a way out as well. So
really quick, Milkiyas, can you maybe turn your video off? Just your audio is cutting a little bit. I think the connection is not so strong. So maybe if your video is off, it will help it a little so we can hear you clearly. But you can keep the screen share. Yeah, thank you.
That's fine now?
Yeah, well, just the audio was cutting out a little bit, but we can go and see if it's better now.
Cut on the video?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
And also, can you please make your presentation full screen or on presentation view?
Oh.
So from where you are, if you just click from current slide in the top left corner.
Yes, now. Fine now, just let me proceed. Sorry for interruption because of the technology, unreliable technology.
No.
Okay, but can you make your presentation full screen when you have?
It's not on okay.
Yeah, so if you just select in the PowerPoint in the left corner from current slide, then we can see the slide larger so we can read it more clearly.
Okay. No. Does that appear now?
No.
Hit F5, I believe.
Okay.
If you hit F5, it will take you to full screen. Milkiyas, F5 itu. Computer kira. F5, I think.
Okay.
You see, argite view kan jiru biro dakte on tab review maddi kan jirtu view on your PowerPoint presentation. View to your right.
Yeah.
Okay. From current
That's
slide.
fine. Okay. Just I can change.
You
can change it.
From current slide can jiru. Yes. And then view on top.
You know, it's okay. I think we don't want to spend too much time on this. Let's just continue without it. It's not a big deal. Nifama.
Well, so now, as I stated earlier, so Ethiopian state legitimacy has been a problem since forced through force or conquering. It's not only current crisis, but also year-old legitimacy crisis facing Ethiopian state. So while internal legitimacy continue to be challenged, but it seems or it appears that if Ethiopia has legitimacy from international perspective. So establishing legitimate and stable single political order had been failed so many times, as my earlier presenter said, attempting to convert legitimacy of origin of the Ethiopian state to the people consent-based from force-based legitimacy halted so many times in Ethiopian history. So many resistance movement against the moved student movement, farmers movement, then different regime, Derg regime, which took over power, intercepting the popular question, then continue to force it based continuing legitimacy, Then against the Derg regime, different liberation movement emerged in 1970s. And then they could demise the unitary state form, but unable to convert the legitimate consent-based state political setting because of the bogus politics of the EPRDF coalition of political parties. Then recently mass protests, particularly led by Oromo, peaceful struggle, that speaking to power in front of the Masil, could shake the EPRDF and force it to halt some of the harmful state policies, but without the EPRDF emerged, and then the name known as Oromara systematically took over power following the Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn resignation question. They named themselves as reformist leader. The faction could save the regime from entire change, as a result of which people who were a criminal during the EPRDF and in official position, they continue to enjoy their power without any responsibility, which they should have been accountable individually or collectively as members. So the language of protest changed to just as deep renewal, transition to democracy discourse. But without going far as again, overtly or cover the so-called reformist leader started misusing the constitution, suddenly dissolved political party which claimed to be elected in accordance with the constitution, and replaced with a new party which has not been elected by people, but through succession. Then the constitutional way of prolonging terms of the regime continued under the guise of COVID-19. That ignited different crises again, continued political polarization, lack of trust, gross violation of human rights, catastrophic humanitarian crisis, civil war, internal displacement, great economic calamities, artificial starvation, armed conflict, which started from non-international, but internationalized to the region, to the Horn of Africa, continued. As a response to that, so many political parties, international communities, donors, Western government, they recommend as a solution, alternative solution, national discussion, political negotiation, constitutional amendment, transitional government, also national dialogue, which my presentation is going to be focused on. Over the last decade, national dialogue have been to be seen as a critical tool for the prevention of violent conflict and for managing political crisis and facilitate transition. Nevertheless, there has been lack of conceptual clarity whether this national dialogue has to be conducted parallel with constitutional setting or to be conducted in supra-constitutional setting, or how can we conduct national dialogue? That is a main question. So from all of a sudden, Ethiopian government come up with the national all problem of Ethiopia, solely initiated it, drafted it, and enacted it, the law to be implemented and plan to the near future. So my presentation therefore explores this legitimacy of the National Dialogue Act, which initiated and enacted by ruling party that created the National Dialogue Commission. So just to conceptualize the national dialogue issue, it's defined as a nationally owned political process aimed to generate consensus among broad range of national stakeholders on the issue concerning them. So typically, national dialogue are convened to resolve political crisis in two ways: year-old political crisis or long-term effect, legitimacy crisis, or short-term conflicts. So if it need to do so, if it need to serve that purpose, it has to be credible, it has to be the inclusive, it has to be transparent, public participation in genuine, and the full consultation of people has to be done. Key determinants of national dialogue has to be strictly followed. So national dialogue maybe consist of different process, from initiation, preparation, process, and implementation. Just for the sake of time, in Horn of Africa, about 3 countries, Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, have convened semi-national dialogue or full national dialogue so far. Some of them successful and some of them failed to bring about peace and security to the region, or to create society-based legitimacy. For example, Sudan's national dialogue failed mainly because of its initiative by the government and very polarized political settings. South Sudan also, even though it could bring the transitional government, but its end result is not yet finalized. Kenya, for the short period of time, it's just likely successful short-term conflict avoided because of that national dialogue. Tunisia has successfully conducted national dialogue, which initiated outside of the government, the ruling party, solely by civil society, then inclusive, and the convener of the national dialogue were participation, genuine participation, and transparent process, just from the initiation, from the preparation, from the process itself, and on the implementation of the national dialogue. So determinant factor for the national dialogue success is therefore as consultative enough, with capacity to bring end the conflict and to create state-society legitimate relationship, and inclusivity, credibility of the convener, the transparency of the process and the public engagement, and implementation mechanism as well. So let me go to the National Dialogue Act of Ethiopia.
We are not seeing your slides, or I think you're not moving the slide forward. Do you want me to share the screen instead so you can talk? Because, yeah, I think you should be. The slides were not moving. I think now you're there. Okay, it just wasn't moving before. Now you're back on track. Okay, please continue.
Shall I continue now?
Yeah, yes, please. Sorry, the slide was just behind. Now you're there.
Okay. Now it's now the National Dialogue Act of Ethiopia is now effective from December 2021. It has 5 parts. It has preamble. The first part of the act about general provision, then about establishment of the commission, which facilitates the national dialogue, then the commissioner's mandate, the council of the commission, and different miscellaneous provisions. From its preamble, it acknowledged the differences and the disagreements on the fundamental national issues in Ethiopia, though it doesn't define the fundamental national issue in very multilingual and the multi-ethnic community. So it just underlined the necessity to the difference in the disagreements through the national dialogue, broad-based, inclusive public dialogue. The ultimate goal of the dialogue, according to the preamble of the law, national consensus, it bolsters the culture of trust and the working together, mend degraded social values through a legislative way. And then its first part, try to define the national dialogue, just similar with the international concept of national dialogue as elsewhere took place. But it gives the Addis Standard and radio country. It included different principles of national dialogue from international experiences, the name inclusivity, transparency, credibility, tolerance, mutual respect, and so on and so on. Then under part 2 to 5, talk about how commission established, the mandate of the commission, the object of the commission, the duties and the responsibilities of the commission. Accordingly, the act established the commission containing 11 members, which nominated, appointed by the House of People Representatives, and also they are fully accountable to the House of People Representatives. So the aim of the act to create the commission is that the commission will facilitate the dialogue, identify the root cause of the problem, then implement the national dialogue, establish the system, and also select the agenda. This is very important issue which I am going to focus on the analysis part. Then appointment of the commission to be done fully by the parliament. Don't forget to take notice of the Ethiopian parliament, that from the nature of the state, Ethiopia is parliamentary system, which there is a fusion of power between executive and legislative organ of the government, so that the prime minister is the member of the parliament. So, and this means that this member of the commission or the commission itself is accountable to the prime minister indirectly, because of the prime minister is the member of the parliament. The criteria for the appointment of the commission is there. The obligation of the commission were so, but the commission is depend budgetary on the government. They take benefit from the government with power to enact regulation in the directives. Then finally, the commission also obliged to hand over documents and the minutes to the Secretariat of the House of People Representatives. So now, when we critically assess this document, I mean the Ethiopian National Dialogue Act, from the international experience, from it, from the existing constitution. At the first, the National Dialogue Proclamation of Ethiopia, with it, the commission is intended to create, are just undoubtedly, I mean, without any question, without any argument, it's unconstitutional. It has no constitutional base at all. Obviously, the power of House of People Representatives is restricted to the Constitution. Constitution defined the power and the function of the House of People Representatives under its Article 51 and 52. Representative is only to make legislation on the federal matter. It's not all federal matter, only specific area exhaustively given for the House of People Representatives. Based on that criteria, the enacting legislation on national dialogue is not given for House of People Representatives. National dialogue issue, which include constitutional issue, is beyond the business of the party, beyond the business of the ruling government. It is a business of the people who have a power to make, amend, and change the constitution. So national dialogue is supra-constitutional business, but House of People Representatives mandate is only limited to legislation, limited to the constitution. So the constitution doesn't allow to anybody to enact legislation which contradict with itself. Obviously, from the name itself, national dialogue neither assigned by the constitution to the federal matter or to the region. It is just of the country. The constitution doesn't remain silent on that part. It intentionally refutes the House of People representative to enact that kinds of laws.
I'm so sorry.
They are making.
I'm sorry, this is my last interruption, but if you could just wrap up. I know you have a lot left, but if you can wrap up in the next 2 or 3 minutes so we have time to do Q&A. But this is really wonderful. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just if you can kind of close up, and then we can maybe address some of the other points during the Q&A if people ask about them.
Thank you very much. Let me finish within a very few minutes of time. So in the national dialogue, when we evaluated its inclusiveness, it has only initiated by the ruling party and drafted and enacted by the Minister of Justice. So it's exclusion of stakeholder. So we can say that it is government project. It was inputted from the stakeholder was not taken into consideration. And then the commission recruited, nominated, and appointed by the House of People representative, which dominated by single majority rule party. So all would trust them. So because of their accountability is also not for people, not for the conscious, but to the House of People representative. So it doesn't build public trust at all. Personally, almost all of the commission were in the position of top government official. For example, the chairperson was nominated by the Prime Minister and served as a commissioner member of administrative boundaries in the Identity Issue Commission. So almost all of them, or majority of them, were enjoying government at the rank of minister official. So obviously they are not neutral. The approach used was just an imposition, and constitutional way of imposition, so that it doesn't recognize the sovereignty and the self-determination of people. So though the move to national dialogue agenda from the violent, even though it's a good start, but it is not national dialogue that the existing one. Revolting against the constitution, which once take an oath under it to implement, but misusing it and they're trying to manipulate via the mockery-like national dialogue, creates another cycle of crisis to the region than a solution. The National Dialogue Act is unconstitutional, exclusionary, and the convener of the commissioner were not credible, not independent. The approach is top-down, affects self-determination of people. The law includes principle, but it's self-defeating. It admits and deny the same rights. So as the way forward, the ruling party has to come back to the constitution. Government cannot initiate the national dialogue while claiming to enjoy power emanates from the National Dialogue Act has to be declared nil in the void with no effect without taking time. One can take, in order to nullify that, there is a procedure just to take it to the regular court or to the House of Federation to have declaration of its nullification. It doesn't any purpose to exist. The second, the way forward, if the government wants to back to its mind, back to the people. People have a power to change the constitution, make the constitution, amend the constitution. So national dialogue is supra-constitutional business beyond ruling party capacity. So House of People representative power is simply delegated. Delegated power cannot further delegate it. So it is a business of the people to conduct national dialogue. The hand of the government has to be tied on that. So inclusive and the credible transparent national dialogue has to be initiated by all stakeholders. Or thirdly, if the government wants to address the year-old problem by going extra constitutional setting that lead to suspending the constitution, then the government which claim to be established by the constitution has to be dissolved, and then interim government has to be established. Then the national dialogue has to be convened in parallel with the interim council. Then the international community may respond on that and help on that. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you so much for that incredibly dense and rich presentation. So we actually do have a third panelist to join us today. He was a little
before it goes on, give me a second. I think prior to when Tsedale was presenting, there's something that happened. So I think for our audience also, I kind of have to explain a bit because that's kind of my profession also. I think, you know, Zoom is, the security of Zoom is nowadays is very compromised. And I've been advising people not to use it, including OSA. What happened while Tsedale was presenting it's called Zoom bombing. So I think it's on the news. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Zoom bombing is that people can take over your computer. There is a brand new flow in Zoom that lets hackers completely take over your computer. So while you're presenting. So I think that's what happened. And please, when you let people in, because people now can get in and take over, you know, they don't need anything. So Zoom is very compromised. So people, our audience, we are streaming on Kedlo too. So people called me and let me know it's happening there. So we had to delete all the program. But yesterday also, when I joined in the beginning to just kind of see, a lot of Indian people were on here. And so I left because I thought I got the wrong link. And I called Dr. Ebis and figured out that, you know, it's the same link. But people were in it who were not invited. So that's what happened. So people kind of have to explain. I have to explain to people. So that's what happened. So when Zoom says that they have into encryption, their claim is false. So please don't use Zoom as much as possible. That's what I advise. There is a lot of options that StreamYard, other more secure things. So now, you know, we're presenting this and this kind of things happen and people, they get distracted and all that stuff. So, but I just wanted to put this out there and thank you guys. That's all I gotta say. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm definitely no tech expert, so it's good to hear the details of that. And yeah, I think we were all really disturbed by what happened. Okay, so we do have a third panelist, but just to look at our time, Tsedale has to leave in around 25 minutes. So I'm going to kind of flip the script a little. So we will take about 25 minutes now to do some Q&A, specifically if you...
Wait, Madeline?
Yeah.
Before we proceed, let's get our media and fixed if you can give us about 4 or 5 minutes, because the streaming, we have an issue with the streaming. And we also have Tsegay Ararssa who have joined us. He was
but
delayed.
I think we only have 25 minutes left with Tsedale, so I think it's best if we, even if we miss some of her time to be streamed, I think it's best that we...
I think the streaming is good, Dr. Ebisa. We are on our part. We took...
That's good? Okay.
Oh, we are good.
Let's
deleted the
give
earlier
Tsedale time, and then we'll have Dr. Tsegay on the panel. Thank you, Madeline.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I'll go. I know some of these hands I think were up from the previous panel, but I'm just going to have to go in the order I see them. So let's start with, I think Oromo was first. Go ahead with your, and please, let's have our questions now just for Tsedale. And if you have questions about the previous panel or for Milkiyas, then we'll come back to those after. So right now, please just questions for Tsedale. But Oromo, if you still have a question, go ahead.
Well, my question is for the previous panel.
Okay, so we'll pause you and we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Next we have Hambisa.
I have a single question for Tsedale. She had a very interesting presentation, And the problem she outlined, we have had since the very beginning, maybe since we were colonized. And so my question is, it appears that we don't very much agree on anything, the Oromo. So what do you suggest that the one overarching national national interest that the Oromo should rally around? Thank you.
Overarching national interest. This question, as I insist, has been there for the last 50 years, and to a certain extent, it was addressed when the 1995 Constitution was promulgated. It was addressed. What happened after that under the EPRDF-TPLF regime was a regress. There was a failure, but we need to distinguish it in the last 4 years. This was completely not only reversed, but undermined significantly. So what I suggest to do is to a revisit of the struggle for the last 50 years and a re-articulation of the Oromo question again, because that is what is swept under the rug as we watch, because we also failed, we also relegated. I don't entirely blame this one on circumstances related to the Oromo alone. What happened when Abiy came was that we loosened our guards. The Oromo loosened their guards because somehow there was this understanding that what was left unanswered for the last 27 years prior to the coming of Prime Minister Abiy would be answered now that the Oromo controlled the state power. So we kind of went into that kind of hibernation, loosened our guard. We, of course, there are several factors contributing to that. The crackdown, particularly after the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa, what happened, the targeted attack against pan-Oromo institutions did not help at all. In fact, it really further weakened the Oromo position in that, and our capacity to produce that and streamline the overarching, demand or question of the Oromo. And instead we have now settled in this kind of acceptance when an official from our own, an Oromo official who spent 3-4 months undermining the Oromo question itself suddenly comes up and says something that the Oromo all of a sudden find resonating with their demand. And then we go again to celebrating that official or that person, without questioning, wait a minute, this person spent the last 4 months, 5 months, a year and a half undermining the very question that the Oromo fought for 50 years. For what? For a transactional political arrangement. So I think what we need to do now is a look inward and the question of questioning our own approach. But for that to happen, there has to be some kind of vortex created among the most powerful Oromo organizations, civic organizations, intellectuals, academia, coming together, serving as a pressure cook for and stopping with this act that we have loosened our guard, and re-channeling again the questions that were left, not only left unanswered, but also reversed under our own watch. So I think there has to be that recognition first that we really have loosened our guard. We need to recollect that back and create the momentum.
Thank you so very much.
Let's go. I think next on my screen, I see Jamal. If you want to go ahead, Jamal.
Yeah, hello, do you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, everybody, the presenters as well as the attendees, the listeners. I have a huge I don't know, disagreement with Tsedale. I want her to assess the whole thing. She said it is Oromo leadership that is causing all of these problems. So I would like to start with multiples of points where I see there is a huge amount of fallacy in the argument itself. One, during the TPLF, the current leaders on power, Abiy and the rest, were also there. So they were no leaders of the Oromo at that time. They can't be overnight Oromo leaders, one thing. Second, as we know, TPLF has always recruited people who are against the Oromo. Either they may be kind of mixed or they hate Oromo culture and they hate Oromo. So it is very difficult to recognize, acknowledge that all these TPLF recruited people were Oromo leaders then and even today. Third, these people are waging war, for example, in the northern part against the Tigray people. So with your assumption, it would mean Oromos are waging war against the Tigray and also causing war, destruction everywhere. So this assumption that the Oromo leadership is fighting the Oromo and other peoples is leading, implying that the Oromos are the destructive forces currently in Ethiopia, which is completely wrong. So I think you have to reassess. And there is also the ideological part to this, which says we want to go back to the glorious past, the bigger Ethiopia, the wonderful Ethiopia, which has been there, which has been built by our kings. And the Oromos are not in favor of all of those kings. So the ideological part doesn't match Oromo. And also many of the arguments is what you said, all the achievements of the Oromo are being retracted, including Oromia and including, you yourself said Oromia is losing its sovereignty more than it has been under the TPLF. So it is completely fallacious that under the leadership of the Oromo is losing everything. So therefore, I don't think the way you assess that Oromo leadership is fighting the Oromo and the others is correct. It doesn't make sense to me as a person. So I would like you to comment. How do you think, why do you think the OPDO, which has been serving the TPLF before and currently serving also the demagogue Amara sentiment, is overnight becoming an Oromo leadership for you in your view, and when we don't even recognize them as Oromo leaders? Thank you.
This is a very comprehensive critic and a very important question to ask. My disagreement in this is in our approach that that sees the OPDO as a non-agent in the Oromo state structure, power structure in that country. For all its fault lines, we're talking about, the OPDO. Was it a party that the Oromo wanted? It is not. It's an imposed party, of course. But for all its fault lines, its failures, in that regional state, this is a party that has the power infrastructure, that built the power, the state infrastructure, the Oromo statehood in the contemporary, of course, in the post-95 arrangement, federal arrangement, with the Oromia regional state. So it is a party that has spearheaded the Oromo bureaucracy in Oromia regional state, right? Helped with the Afan Oromo, the language become the bureaucratic language in the Oromia regional state. So there is an agency in the OPDO that is an Oromo agency of the power structure there, be it security, be it a civil service, bureaucracy, judiciary, and all this. So this dismissal that this is not happening by an Oromo party is, I think, reductionism. We need to recognize that there is an agency in that, and that they have spearheaded this infrastructure, intelligence, security, bureaucracy. You can expand that to the judiciary and all these things. So their failure cannot be substituted by a non-agent party as a non-agent agency for the Oromo. So we need to hold that vis-a-vis instead of saying the OPDO has never been an Oromo party. It failed. Yes, we held them to account, right? The Oromo people held them to account where they failed. But the Oromo protest was It was not about that, a complete elimination of the OPDO. When they showed a sign of reform, the people embraced them back. When they adopted the language of the street, the protesters, we didn't question, we embraced them back. We want them to work. We want that structure to function, to work, which means there is a certain level of recognition with what they did, as populist as they turned out to be, a very disappointing thing. But when we have seen the chances, we embrace them. So it's this reductionism narrative really need to be looked into. And it has to be evaluated based on that state infrastructure, that state power that they still control. There is a whole lot of infrastructure in Oromia regional states, security, intelligence, business, and all these things. But then it has to be viewed from that point of view and not from the non-agency point of view. I really argue on that. And that's why we need to implore its existence, but its failures as well. But your points are absolutely, what we always discuss. I agree with that, but I respond negatively to it.
Thank you for that question and for that really rich answer. I think we have time for about 2 more questions. I think some of them are from the previous panel. So let's go to Mohammed Ali, if you'd like to ask. And please keep your question just simple to the question, just in the interest of time. Mohammed.
Yeah. Thank you, Tsedale. It's wonderful to see you on OSA Forum for the second time, and I hope you will join us next time also. And thank you also for the wonderful thing you did with Addis Standard. In terms of what is currently happening in Oromia, OPDO leaders, all the points you mentioned about agency, about this, that, even given that, they all what they really got after 2018 is total control of the state machinery for suppressing the people they were supposed to represent. Honest to God, Tsedale, I have been studying Ethiopian history since 15th century, especially since the creation of the Ethiopian Empire by Menelik. The empire that was based on the destruction of Oromo power and the denial of Oromo identity. Since they came to power, everything they have been doing is what was built the previous 27 years in terms of Oromo identity, the language you mentioned, almost Oromo institutions, all those things are now basically undermined. They have started teaching Amharic from first grade last September, and it will not be long before they stop teaching Afan Oromo to our children, while we see our people struggled, as you said, for more than 50 years, and the gains of all that will be taken away by OPDO leaders. Let me finish. These people, honest to God, are the most brutal, the most cruel I have never seen in the history of that country. When a woman, while giving birth in labor, was burned together with her house and destroyed. It was only a week ago when that happened. And if you tell me this is an Oromo government, it's very difficult. Please know, I honestly respect you. You are wonderful. You are a journalist, but on this point, let me say, these are the most brutal pressures that the Oromo people have really faced. I'm sorry if I took much time.
No problem, thank you. And this is why I am saying that we will need to create a mechanism to hold them to account. The point is what to be done, how to resuscitate the failure, how to reverse back the revolution itself, which is being failed by the Opidio itself, right? And what do the Oromo need to do to decouple the politics of state rent, for example? Rent distribution has absolutely played a lot of role in the reversal and the counter-revolution, state rent distribution, right? And we can blame the Opidio for that. They have always been at fault, and we have always been screaming about that. What explains some of the vital additions to the current narrative today of individuals who flipped and are playing an active role in undermining and in reversing the revolution, including deploying an extensive mechanism of using media? How do we explain that? Are we also going to dismiss that this is not an Oromo failure? You know, that contributes. We're not looking into the role of that media manipulation that is being done under the auspices of individuals who have been front and center of the Oromo revolution, helping in the knowledge production of it, and streamlining it, and defining it, and introducing it to the rest of the world, reverse it. So there is that need of also decoupling the Oromo struggle from its vulnerabilities to state rent distribution. We have also failed there. Strong people who, you know, who
Madeline, no, we
become
don't
institutions.
actually.
There is a failure
Madeline,
there as well.
Madeline.
I think that was an accident.
It was an accident. Please proceed.
So I think to wrap it up here, I understand that I'm putting myself in a very hot seat for saying this, but we need to start looking inward. There's a lot to look inward as well. And most importantly, I really would like to urge this gathering to consider in coming together, organizing the civic organizations, academicians, intellectuals, coming together and first identifying how is it that the revolution was reversed, reaching at a consensus in that, which will then pave the way to how to address it. But most importantly, we really need to start playing a role in ending the conflict in Oromia. It's tearing the region apart. We cannot unsee that. We cannot unsee that there is a war happening in Oromia regional state when the regional state is firmly today under the leadership of the former OPDO. You know, we could blame the TPLF previously for having, you know, a Moxit government there, a puppet government there. Somehow we need to really pause that and start looking in. But we really need to play a role in ending the conflict. Because if we don't do that, there is not room for charting a path forward, charting a path when the relationship to define the relationship between the Oromos and the Ethiopian state, the bigger picture there. That has to be, you know, resuscitated again as well. But first and foremost, this conflict must come to an end, and a peaceful resolution must be found for that. And independent institutions, civic organization should come together to serve as a pressure group in putting the warring factions together and to end this conflict. It's only when we are at peace that we could start thinking about our relationship with the state, the Ethiopian state. So I really urge you to consider that. But for that to happen, we have to recognize the failures and own a certain part of it, if not all of it. I thank you.
Thank you. Again, we have so many questions lined up. I know we just have a very, very few minutes left with you. We want to respect your time. I'm really grateful for giving such thoughtful responses. So we'll go, I think next is maybe Dr.
I don't
Ararssa.
think we have time for further question. Let's have Dr. Tsegay come on board because it's really late where he's at. He's on the other side of the country. Okay. Let's introduce him and have him. In the meantime, I just want to, if Tsedale have 1 minute for me to ask one question. Looking ahead, what are the role of civil societies and others in making all political actors of Oromia accountable? What strategy do you recommend in trying to hold them accountable to stand by the interest of Oromo people?
Yes, that's a very good question. I've been looking into some of the particularly diaspora-based civic organizations, Oromo civic organizations. I have seen in all about that joint consensus document that was signed by around 60 civic organizations, and it was really an overwhelming number of Oromo-centered civic organizations. We need to look into the potential of these organizations to create an alliance of a pressure group to hold the politicians to account, be it OPIDO, be it OFC, be it OLF, be it OLA. Politicians are politicians. Really, the first and foremost, they serve their own interest, but they need to be held to account. So I think the coming together of this kind of non-political, strong pressure group that could be created from existing, Oromo-centered organizations for the sole purpose of creating and streamlining the Oromo interest and holding the politicians to account for that, where they fail. It doesn't matter who holds the state power currently, but there has to be, and that has to go into a grassroots level. If these civic organizations come together, and there is a possibility of communicating those messages to the grassroots down there, so that the youth knows how to hold their politicians to account. We need to create that, to create the paths, the way to articulate, most importantly, the questions, and to create even more powerful media appearance and media institutions that could really streamline the questions. But for that to happen, I think the coming together is the most important thing to me. The coming together and identifying how civic organizations could serve as the checks and balances of the politicians. It doesn't matter which political party. But we lack that, and we need to have that. The checks and balances of, be it the armed struggle, be it the OFC, the OLF, it doesn't matter, as I said. It has to be beyond a non-partisan thing, above and beyond the politics, but serving the Oromo community, the Oromo people. I think there has to be a way to do that. If I answered the question.
I think you did. Thank you so much. Really cannot begin to thank you enough for your wonderful words and for speaking with us today. I know we're all really grateful to hear from you, and hopefully we can have you again at the annual and have some more time with you. But Galatoma Guda, Baisin Galatipada. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I know I was not prepared very well. This was a very short notice, but it's a pleasure to be with you.
We're happy to have you for any amount of time. Okay, so now we'll jump back to the presentation. So if you have your hands up, you can keep them raised. We will have some time for Q&A again after, but now we want to move to Tsegay Ararssa, who has joined us. I've completely lost my notes with your biography, so I'll let you introduce yourself. I apologize. But Tsegay, if you're here, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madeline. Can you all hear me? Can you
Yes.
show me a sign? Just
Yes,
yeah.
we can hear
Thank
you.
We
See
can
you.
hear you, Doc.
All right. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you for inviting me. It's 5 a.m. at my end in Australia here. My name is Tsegay Ararssa. I am an Oromo from Ethiopia. I'm a lawyer by training and a law teacher by vocation. I like to call myself an independent legal scholar who is also a publicly engaged intellectual. I'm a very reluctant participant in public life, and a reluctant participant on social media. But 2014 changed everything. The Oromo protest erupted, and I was drawn into social media activism. And over time, I ended up becoming the unofficial spokesperson of the Oromo protest. And then, without my knowing, in the Amhara media networks, I was an extremist Oromo activist. I took it as a badge of honor, and I remain to be a publicly engaged public legal commentator on issues related to Ethiopia and Oromia in particular. The question, I'm not going to take a lot of time, as I always do, irrespective of my promise, but I will be only speaking to questions sent to me by Ebisa a few weeks ago. And these are 3 questions, and if you can, please, Ebisa, share the slides I have. Yes. So in the process of responding to the questions sent to me, I thought it's good to frame the topic as the quest for collective agency, the Oromo in a violent empire that is now granted a new afterlife. The reason I took up this title is because the questions that were sent to me is, what does the Oromo want? Okay, there are 3 questions, but in one or the other way, all of them simply ask, what does the Oromo want? What are the Oromo demands? What is it that Oromo is looking for at this point in time? What is it that Oromos are bringing to the table of political negotiation, if there is going to be one, towards settlement? That's basically the question. And I tried to think of what exactly it is that we need. And of course, what we demand, what Oromos as a nation demand, changes over time, it evolves, and it's dependent on the historical contingencies that it exists in. There is a diversity of interests, no question about it, as Tsedale was hinting at, insisting actually a while ago. But over time, since 2018, since the revolution was hijacked, the Oromo demand has been distilled into one. The Mechu Magarsa was famous once saying during the TPLF-dominated EPRDF rule, he said, in politics in Ethiopia means different things to different people. And he said back then, to the Amhara, it's complex. To the Tigrayan, it is very simple, it is himself. To the Oromo, also it is simple, withdrawal and rejection. Not so at this point in time. Since 2014, Oromos are extremely engaged with the Ethiopian state. For a long time, the Oromo protest as a critical, loyal voice. And now, after the Oromo public has been disoriented and completely lost its agency, it has become, the question has become one. It has become more simpler, not complicated. And so the question was, what does the Oromo want? And I said, maybe, because I'm also studying the place of the Oromo in the making and breaking of Ethiopia in the legal constitutional texts of Ethiopia, and how the constitutional legal materials have been othering Oromo in the empire. And because of that, I was looking through where we have actually failed. And for a long time, the Oromo question has been tinkered with in the form of the land question, 1974, in the form of nationalities question, 1991. We've been dealing with rights. We've been dealing with interests, but we have never dealt with power, and we've never dealt with the capacity to determine our agency. And I said, maybe, if you don't have that agency, that collective agency, not Oromo person's individual agency, maybe that makes sense to all the kinds of the detailed demands that we deal with. So this is the topic, and the what I was asked was what are the questions? So can you go back to the overview, please? The slides, the overview. Okay, thank you. So I will first, of course, deal with the quest, which is what does the Oromo want? What do they bring to the table? Secondly, I will talk about the Oromo hope. What do they expect to happen? What do they anticipate in the light of the current developments? And in this section, I will first try to sketch up the current developments, where we are at this point in time, and then I'll list down the major things that we expect. And finally, what are the consequences of othering, or not othering in Ebissa's words, what are the consequences of excluding Oromos from the equation that leads to a solution or a political settlement? What is the consequence of ignoring Oromos? And the answer is, in some ways, it's very simple. All the answers to all these questions. And about the demands, I can only submit a grocery list of what Oromo wants, both from the Oromo protest times and currently. But I just wanted to provoke some thoughts by talking about some of these questions. So I don't really take much time, because I basically speak to these three major questions: what Oromos want, and what they bring to the table, and then what their hope is. Now, the second slide, please, quickly, yes. So those are the questions. What do we want? What do we expect? And what is the consequence of exclusion? And basically, I try to answer these three questions. Third slide, please. So what do we want? That's the quests. In American parlance, it's the asks. What do Oromo ask? And in my view, and I argue, probably more elaborately in the full text of my remarks. And by the way, this is not an academic research paper. It is just my observation and interpretation of developments in recent years. But the full text of the remarks will be more comprehensive and will analyze this and develop the argument. So my argument is that the Oromo wants, although it is expressed in various forms, in various terms, in various institutional frameworks, the Oromo want at this point in time is collective agency. That is the capacity to decide on their destiny. And so it can be boiled down to one question: resolve whether the Oromo-Ethiopia relationship once and for all by conducting a referendum. And that will be the basic answer. And if you forget everything else I say, I think that's the whole point. Now, second, to elaborate on this further, you can say Oromos have been struggling for a long time, because the Oromo critique of Ethiopia always has been a loyal critique, a redemptive critique. And for that purpose, they have been arguing and fighting for social justice, recognition of equality and dignity and language, and so on and so forth. The Oromo protest movement of 2014 to 2018 was basically a demand for social justice. It was an act of loyalty, as I always said, but that was completely ignored, suppressed, and the empire is resuscitated, and the empire has struck back. And so, is it possible that the season of fighting for equality and social justice is passé? Is it possible that the season of redemption is gone? Is it possible that the bridge has been broken? Have we crossed the Rubicon? And therefore, as you know, the people, intellectual history periodizes times, and the 19th century was said to be the century of freedom, and the 20th century, they said, was going to be the century of equality. And I think in our case, the 19th, the struggle of the last 60 years for a long time, in some ways, with all its varieties, was for freedom, for social justice and equality and democratization and redemption of the Ethiopian empire. Maybe a new chapter has started now. The time for freedom has come, because now freedom has been imposed. Now the demand for freedom has been imposed on Oromos at this point in time. In 2016 to 2018, Oromos have been the most loyal. I mean, Hachalu Hundessa was assassinated while singing Oromon Biyya Jara Malee, Oromon Biyya Digare. Having said this, he was killed. And Jawar was calling for negotiation, and he was arrested. First attempted assassination and then arrested. These are typical expressions of the Oromo protest movement. These are persons that embody that season of arguing for social justice. After them, in my view, what came back? The empire struck back and said, we are going to enforce the logic of elimination embodied in the colonial settler policy. And so the elimination project has started. Destroy Oromo nationalism, kill Oromos, and break up the region and eradicate Oromoma. If this is the case, then the question becomes survival. And for effective survival, what you have to do is reassert or regain your collective agency beyond political tinkering, beyond fighting about who has a greater part in the empire or not. You know, Adwa Kenya, Bulcha was the one who fought for Adwa, etc. I think that's absolutely nonsense, because at this point in time, your existence itself, you are wished out of existence in Ethiopia. So if that is the case, then it's like freedom is now imposed upon us. It has become a burden. It has become a responsibility. To fight for it has become a responsibility. And as we do, we also have to build solidarity with the others in order to create a coalition of the oppressed, the others in Ethiopia. Oromo is not the only other. And probably I argue that the united front of federalists and confederalist forces that the OLA and TDA as a nucleus started will be the future. And I chair a group, a civic group established in Virginia, Solidarity of Nations of Ethiopia. At this point in time, we try to build an alliance of the oppressed and try to forge a better future for Ethiopia, a qualitatively better future for nations and nationalities and peoples in Ethiopia who have a collective agency, and through that collective agency, renegotiate the terms of their living together if they have to. Can we move to the other slide? Yes. So that will just in a broad, in a very broad way, generally, that's what the Oromo at this point want. And I know I'm provocative, I'm being provocative, but we'll discuss that later in detail. Now, what do the Oromo expect at this point in time? And what is the present? What does the present show? The present, at this point in time, we have an empire striking back. The Ethiopian empire having an afterlife, a new one, actually. It has always had an afterlife, even after 1974, after 1991. But now it is being given a new afterlife. And there are genocidal wars, wars to eliminate people, to purify their blood, to cleanse them from the land, to clean the cities, and so on and so forth. We have genocidal wars, not just in Tigray, but also in Oromia and in various other places, including among the people of the southern people in the north, which is the Command and the Agao, and the Wollo Oromo. And we have state terrorism, sponsored vigilantes invade, conquer, and attack civilians, burn down villages, and take the herd the cattle and move away. And Abiy Ahmed's regime is basically giving them a wink. And you did well, because there has never been even a media news coverage. There has never been a government official who says, oh, this is bad. And in fact, Oromos are being blamed for that all the time, and the others as well. And then we have the state-sponsored hate speech. From the palace on up until media outlets and ordinary individuals in social media, the hate speech is incredible. It's almost like, unless Oromos are eliminated from this earth, this country cannot be peaceful. That's the slogan that is posted in Addis Ababa University last week. And this is where we are. And the government is not doing anything. What did the government do in response? In response, they arrested, they battered, they hit, they wounded the Oromo students. And so there is this project of unmaking federalism. Milkiyas was talking earlier about how the dialogue commission is basically engaged in the work of constitutional amendment, basically to undo the federal system, to break up the regions, to securitize identity, meaning looking at our identity as a threat to national security and re-centralizing of state power. And these are the areas identified for amendment, by the way, even by this commission, but earlier on by the Boundary Commission, which is also another unconstitutional agency. And so the present is a present of multiple crises. We've got a security crisis, war, conflict, genocide, hate propaganda, hate speech, and vigilante attacks. This is true of Oromia, this is true of Tigray, this is true of Benishangul Gumuz. This is to a certain extent was true in Wolaita, in Sidama, and on and on. So there is the security crisis, there is the humanitarian crisis. I shouldn't talk about the statistics of how many people are looking for humanitarian aid. We have a political crisis, a crisis of legitimacy being one, the narrowing down of the political space being the other, the complete enfeeblement of Oromo political parties, and the arrest and liquidation of the Oromo political leaders, to be honest. And never mind the General Assembly meetings that KFO or OFC is having at this point in time. It's a matter of survival for them. So the political crisis is deep and there. And we have the economic problem, which I'll not deal with, I'm not an economist. And then the diplomatic geopolitical crisis is there. You have Eritrea meddling in matters in Ethiopian affairs, and you have the IGAD completely in chaos. You have the entire region completely unstable. Alliances and counter alliances are forged every day and made and broken every day, and there is that. And there is a social crisis. The social crisis is the fact that the regime basically moves. There is a forced displacement of people. There is a mass settlement in Oromia, deliberately intended to create a demographic change, especially in and around the borders and in around the cities. So it's a multiple state of crisis. Now, in this context, can we go to the other slide, please? In this context, if this is the present, then what are our asks? What are our priorities? And first and foremost, of course, as Tsedale was saying, as everybody was saying, we have to end the war. The war, not just in Tigray, but in Oromia, which is just now redeclared. Just last week, Shimelis Abdiisa said, we are going to have a serious engagement with Oneg Sheni, OLF, and eliminate them in 1 month. He promised that. Of course, they have pledged to do so many times. Of course, they have failed. Of course, they have said that they have eliminated OLF. But of course, they do vow in that manner. But now that they have got a respite from the northern front, which is the Tigrayan front, because they have this fake truce, they are trying to mobilize their energy to basically fight their war in Oromia. But Oromia has been in war for the last 3 years continuously. So the first responsibility, the first demand, the first thing that we engage in is to end the war. And this is done by defeating Abiy Ahmed, disarming the vigilante groups and his associates, and getting Eritrea out of our affairs. If diplomatically that can be done, that's good, but it won't, I mean, you know, the limits of diplomacy these days, the international community almost doesn't exist. But it has become the fate for us to go all the way by ourselves. And so these are the tasks. And this is a gargantuan task. And then, of course, we have to restore the status quo ante if we have to settle everything politically. And then, as I said, disarm terrorizing people groups, stopping all hostilities and countering hate speech and crime, and stabilizing the regional. It's very interesting that some of the sanctions in the US Senate and Congress draft bills also target basically these areas. And I think this is also, I work very closely with the Oromo Liberation Army and with the Tigray Defense Forces. I work with the Solidarity of Nations. I try to facilitate the work of kind of activate and pace the work of the United Front. And I see that these are basically the common demands that to stabilize the regional states, to counter hate speech, to disarm these terror groups, and restore status quo ante. Let's go back to the constitutional signboard. Let's go back to the constitutional signposts. That's basically what the asks are. Next slide. And then, because there is the humanitarian crisis, of course, we have to make sure that access is open, siege is broken, humanitarian acts are in the course of the discourse towards negotiation. I think we have to delink the humanitarian from the political, because the humanitarian is very urgent, and it is basically part of the humanitarian law, that the law of war that soldiers should obey, and it doesn't have to wait until political negotiation, political settlement is achieved. And so we have to have, even as you do your war, even as you do your politics, you have to make sure that humanitarian aid is accessible to the needy. And by the way, humanitarian crisis is not just in Tigray, in Afar, or in Amhara, as the international community tends to represent it. We have a serious humanitarian crisis in Wallo, in Wallagga, in Borana, in Arsi, in Karayu, in Guji, in Bale, and in various other places like the Somali region, the southern region, everywhere. Some of it is naturally created. Some of it is created by the war that Abiy has been fighting without the light of international media coverage in the last 3 years. And the Agao command and Wallo people of Amhara region are in the constant threat, the threat of elimination. And in fact, in the future, in the immediate future, in a post-Abiy future, one can imagine the only thing we have to do is to grant them the opportunity to establish their own local government, provisional local government, until their demand for statehood or separate identity is constitutionally verified through a referendum. And so there are a number of humanitarian issues everywhere, and that has to be done immediately without even waiting for a political settlement to happen. Shall we move on to the next one? Yes, the third ask is basically about politics and the political, averting the political crisis. And here we need to free political prisoners. We need to demilitarize politics, because what we have seen in the last 3 years is that politics has become a matter of the army. By the way, Abiy Ahmed he pretends like a civilian, but since the day he assumed power, he has been using the military. The police didn't really have any significance as it used to during the Oromo protest. It was a federal police that we were fighting against, that we were always railing against. And we, at some point when there is emergency, there was the army. And in fact, one of the questions was, take your military to the barracks. Now that language has disappeared from a political debate, because having the military do everything has become the new normal. And of course, increasingly in the last 3 years, to be an Oromo has become a crime, to be a Tigrayan has become a security threat, and therefore the two especially are securitized. That's why you have ethnic profiling. That's why you have ethnic cleansing. That's why you have all sorts of arbitrary arrest and in some places, arbitrary execution and making a political assassination of key leaders and so on and so forth. So the other thing is to have an inclusive dialogue in an enlarged political space. Now, I do not expect Abiy Ahmed to be presiding over, contrary to what Tsedale was saying. Opidio has said that it is not Oromo, and I have no reason to believe that they are Oromo. They have changed themselves into Prosperity Party precisely because they wanted to distance themselves from Oromo politics, because they don't want any politics to be done in an Oromo way. And they have never done an Oromo politics, and they have actually denounced it, politics done as Oromos. And I have no reason to say that they are Oromos. Of course, our situation is very complex, and we need to heed that complexity. However, this group is not the Oromo group. And in fact, it is a terrorist group. It is a genocidal regime. It has to be put on trial, not engage in a dialogue. There is no way you can engage with a genocider. There is no way you can appease a genocider. And it has never been the case in history, and it cannot be now. And I think they cannot be part of the equation at all. There is no way Abiy Ahmed and his associates can be part of the equation. Criminals should go to jail, and an enlarged political space must be created. And in that enlarged political space, a genuine dialogue that will not put a taboo on any agenda should start. And then, of course, because there are so many outstanding, enduring, long, simmering political demands, we need to show at this point in time, if you want some better future, brighter future, we need to show a resolve, a commitment to address outstanding political demands, like the land issue in Oromia, Ababiyumma, the right to one's own city, the right to linguistic justice, meaning having more than one language as a federal working language. There are a host of questions, and those demands, outstanding questions, to be, you have to be able to resolve, to build trust, and to show, you have to show commitment that you will address them. You have to have a priority. You have to have a timeline. One of these is, for example, in the southern region alone, we have about 10 or 11 demand for statehood. And you cannot imagine a future without assuring these groups that you will be addressing their problems. Because these questions have been constitutional, they have been demanded constitutionally. Abiy Ahmed wanted to suppress them, and some of them became, in fact, went back to armed struggle. If that is the case, if you want to engage Ethiopia in the future, and if you also want to build a coalition of the oppressed or the coalition from the south, then you will have to show commitment to address these outstanding political demands. What does that mean? In simple terms, in my work with the future roadmap, I was basically saying, get a referendum act, get a provisional government, let the provisional government have a referendum act, and establish a referendum commission and set the procedure for referendum, and tell them that this will be done in your regions when it comes. And that commitment will make everyone calm. This will demilitarize the politics. People will say, okay, let's wait. And so that will be one way of dealing with it. And we put this as one of the demands of the Oromo. And then, of course, as I said earlier, the return to constitutional signposts. And by the way, Ethiopia can never be post-FDRE constitution. The empire can strike back only to lead us to crisis and genocide and warfare. There will be no post-self-determination time in Ethiopia. There will be no post-FDRE time in Ethiopia. It promises an open federal system, an association of the willing, created, rallying around the idea, the federal idea. And I do not think it is possible to turn the clock, the political clock back, and say, we can just undo this constitution and then there will be okay. No, there will be no post-FDRE moment. much to my disgust, because I've been engaged for 15 years of my academic life critiquing that constitution, debunking it, but at least the promise stands. And since the promise stands, if you want a peaceful kind of transition in the Horn of Africa, and this is for the Westerners, I think there is no way we can steer away from the constitution, and there is no way that they can come up with a better constitution. Also, we can deal with issues that are not properly dealt with, minority rights, for example, a host of other things. But there will be no post-FDRE moment, and we need to go back to the constitutional signpost. And this can be an instrument as we go into a framework we can have in our hand as we go into negotiating or mediating between the warring groups. Next slide. This one is about the social and economic. I'm not big on this because I really don't understand. I know economic, how economic problems can be solved. It would be pretentious on my part, but I know that this mass settlement in Oromia, politically motivated and sanctioned mass mobility, the land theft. At some point, even the Opidio mayors have been saying this is a land invasion. This is not a settlement. This is not just a land grab. It is an invasion, and it was politically directed, orchestrated. And then there is this vigilante-induced eviction and destruction. So these things must stop. And of course, the ethnic profiling and all this ugly things going on should be arrested. And one thing that has come to the fore in the last 3 years, and since Abiy came to power, is the blurred relationship between church and state. And the old state religion has gone to the palace, the Daniel Kubrat, and the new Pentecostal state religion, again, because Abiy is Protestant, Pentecostal, prosperity, whatever. And so they basically stormed the palace. And the consequence of that is they have this religious-oriented rail against some other groups. On the other hand, they also use religion as a card to divide people, to create other cleavages than, for example, ethno-national cleavages. And that has completely eroded the secularist principle that has been upheld in the constitution and upheld even during Mengistu's time. Since 1974, as you know, interreligious equality and secularism has been respected. At this point in time, the Orthodox Church reasserts itself as considering itself as Ethiopia, basically, as the political body, and Abiy does his politics from the closet, the prayer closet, and he has international partners in this regard, senators and congressmen in the United States, and this has to stop. I think we need to, when we say we need to go back to constitutional signposts, one of the things that we have to once again reinvigorate is the principle of secularism in the Constitution, Article 11, the separation of state and church, and the non-interference of state in religion, religion in a state, and the recognition of religious diversity in that country, and protection of religious freedom of everyone. The other is the economy has gone military. I think last year, the entire Ethiopian budget was a war budget, and the economy is basically not being managed properly at all. In fact, if it does exist, and it's important that resuscitating the economic projects, many projects that have been stalled or destroyed, stolen, etc., must be resuscitated. Next slide, please.
But just really quick, sorry to interrupt, but if you could wrap up I know you have a lot of real more dense data yet, but just in the next 5 minutes would be great.
Okay, this one. In terms of, this is again more towards the international community. And first thing we want is to get Eritrea out of the equation. And the international community in particular has to put a lot of pressure, including sanctions on Eritrea. And also recognize this is missing in the eyes of the international community. The Oromo is basically the centerpiece of the Horn. It is the least visible, and that's because it never had a collective agency. And when international media outlets report the Oromo case, it's like rebel groups in the south. It's communal violence in the south, as if there is a horizontal strife going on, and as if the big elephant in the room is not the unstable Oromia. So Oromia is the centerpiece of the Horn, and you have to treat it as such. We have to treat it as such. And the Oromos should know that if you have to do diplomacy and international advocacy on the international level, then remember that this is a giant in the Horn of Africa, and make sure the connections are important to appeal to the international community also. And thirdly, Abiy has begun to turn to authoritarian regimes elsewhere, Russia, Turkey, and so on and so forth. And I think one has to interrupt this. And then there is this usual, of course, since imperial times, raid diplomacy that the Ethiopian political class has in relation to Africa. It's like these Africans, these blacks, and it's a very racial, racist statements that they make about Africa and our historic enemies, the Middle East, and so on and so forth. I think that has to be also re-evaluated. And we, of course, in good faith, we need to negotiate with Egypt, Sudan, and all the neighborhoods in the Nile in relation to the Nile. And of course, we should negotiate in the spirit of brotherhood and African fraternity, as Article 86 of the Constitution says. And next slide, and I will be done. Yes, and this one is what is the cost of what's the consequence of excluding Oromos? Well, it's the deluge, the proverbial deluge, the chaos. I mean, if you ignore Oromo and brace yourself for a non-stop chaos, war, famine, want, strife, genocide. You know why until today East Africa is the way it is? Because we couldn't get the violence out of the politics. It has been established. I mean, that area has been. Harry Reid, I think, wrote a book, States of Violence, in 2011, and he says that the East Africa, the Horn of Africa, is forged by violence and is maintained by violence. And until we deal with the violence that is ingrained into the DNA of those countries, we cannot, the politics of those countries, we cannot stabilize it. And the key and the point of departure is Oromia. And the reason these things, famine, war, want, strife, genocide recur is because of the empire. The deep state, you would say, in other places, but the empire having an afterlife and always coming back to strike us, and it knows politics only violently. And so, if you ignore Oromos, then brace yourself for constant, the eternal peacelessness in the area. And it's, of course, it will result in a militarized politics. And as always, it will be a politics that securitizes identity, national ethnic identity. It will multiply the human insecurity situation in the region. It's a very ecologically fragile region, as you know, aid prone. And of course, whoever is ignoring the Oromos will lose a credible partner in the democratization process in the Horn of Africa. If you want to create a stable Horn of Africa, then you have lost a credible, without Oromos, then you have lost a credible ally, a credible partner. And probably Oromos are one of the groups that are most invested in democratization, probably unlike the other groups that go for preserving all the privileges and fight against the laws of supremacy. And there is a fear of democracy among some of them. So Oromos are invested in democracy, and of course have the tradition of doing democratic governance. And if you leave them out, then you leave all that opportunity out. You squander the opportunity to experiment in a project of reassociating the Horn of Africa around the idea of a federal union. One other thing we will squander is the opportunity to install a lasting peace in the region. One of the reasons I say we will never have a post-FDRE moment is because the FDRE moment, for all its unimplementation, for all its dead law in the books, it basically says the project is by recognizing collective agency of the nations, which determine their destiny to create a common polity, want to create a lasting peace. And self-determination was a way of making the revolution continue and creating an open federal system that helps to disassociate and reassociate. And that process is purely legal political, which means if you want a lasting peace, that's the thing that you have to do. And last slide, please. The last question, my conclusion is only one question. And the question is, the Ethiopian state at this point in time is the sick old man of Horn of Africa. The question for us is, do we cure it? Do you want to cure it? Or do you want to bury it? In 2018, did we fail to bury it? And are we paying the consequence now? Or did we fail to cure it? And was the hope that it can be cured, that it can be redeemed? Was that a misguided one? Is a question I leave us with. Is redemption possible? And is it dangerous? 2018 shows that it is dangerous. It helped the empire to strike back. It gave the empire an afterlife. It gave actually a settler colonial logic of elimination full political energy. And so the sick old man is rising as a phoenix in arms. At some point, it was Annette Weber who used this word, referring to Ethiopia. Is Ethiopia a phoenix in arms? And that was in 2010. But now I think this sick old man, the empire, is armed and creating havoc, wreaking havoc in the region. And so as we conclude, I ask this question: as we look into the future, are we going to resurrect the sick old man, which is Abiy's project, or are we going to work towards a union of the willing, who rally around the federal idea through recovering collective agency of the oppressed and reassociating of all these coalition of the oppressed in a plurinational space forged for creating a common destiny? Is it Abiy's project, or is it the Oromo aspiration that would be a workable future for the Horn of Africa? I strongly argue that the latter is the case. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for that really in-depth presentation. I'm sorry we don't have more time to hear from you. I wish we did. I see that there are a lot of hands raised, but in the interest of time, we are going to move on to the next panel. If you have a question, just please take note of it. We're going to lower all the hands just for clarity. And yeah, questions for Obo Milkiyas, Obo Tsegay, save them for the end and we will get there. But thank you again for your presentation. And I will now pass the floor over to Abisa to lead the next panel. Sorry, maybe we might be having some technical challenges. I'm not sure. Okay, great. There you are.
Okay. I'm sorry. Are all our panelists in? They're given access? Madeline?
I'm not sure. I just came back to the screen share, so I'll have to look. I think why don't you begin with the introduction and then we can work on getting them ready for you.
Okay, I've seen Dr. Renee and Professor Lyons. Terrence is there. We're just missing Ambassador Herman Cohen. If he is in, we could have him ready. Okay, thank you so much. What an enlightening conversation panel that was there. Prior to this, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Tsegay, for your articulation, for explaining the deep-rooted problem of that empire and what the Oromo demands are. We thought this is relevant to be articulated for ourselves as well as for the international community, for Ethiopian partners as we go forward. And the previous panelists also articulated how the grassroots democratic movement have been hijacked, and this is a continuation of that. And we really appreciate your presence, especially in short notice for joining us. I really thank you. The next panel that we have